As the president suggests that he is beyond reconsideration, I think the language he used when it comes to withdrawing from NATO, whether Secretary Rutte can change his mind this week.
Well, I think that is going to be the reason why Mr. Rutte is coming, although, of course, the visit was already announced before those statements. He's going to try to find a way to tell Donald Trump that, in fact, NATO is vital to American security. That's not a hard case to make, by the way. Today actually happens to be the 77th anniversary of the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty by 12 nations, of course, including the United States. And for 77 years, the United States has been led by people in the Oval Office and everywhere else in senior military and civilian positions who have understood that it is much better to try to prevent war in Europe than trying to have to fight it as we did in World War I and World War II. It's better, it's cheaper, it makes us more powerful, it makes us more prosperous, it makes us more secure, and ultimately it makes us more free. That is the foundation of NATO. It is something that President Trump has never really understood, or at least bought into. He thinks the burdens of NATO are larger than the benefits, and that is the challenge that Mr. Rutte will have when he comes to Washington next week.
I was curious to get your reaction to the president's primetime address, because there's been quite a lot of reporting going into that address that one of the things he was going to do was really go after NATO. He didn't really do that. He talked around it a little bit. He said, you know, if it's the oil that you need, you should go protect it. But he didn't name names, and he didn't go after the alliance. I'm wondering if you think that was misreported, or my instinct tells me that perhaps it was a recalibration that someone might have gotten in his ear. I'm wondering what your take is on that, and if you think he can be swayed by people he does tend to listen to, Rutte and the president of Finland, who goes golfing with him, my sources are telling me, has a good ability to get him back into the fold occasionally.
Yeah, no, you know, who knows what drives the president, and who knows how this speech came together. It's still a mystery, I think, to most of us, why he decided to deliver a speech that was, frankly, content-free. The only things he said, he had already said either on Truth Social or in interviews in the previous few days. But you're right, Christina, to underline that there was no statement that he was going to withdraw from NATO. In fact, he's been silent ever since the speech in the last 3 days on this, until the next Truth Post, of course. And there are people who can talk to him, and he does listen once in a while. Of course, Lindsey Graham and a whole bunch of senators are on record very much in favor of NATO. Senator Thune, a majority leader, made very clear that as far as he was concerned, and as far as his Republican caucus on the Senate was concerned, this is not something that they would support. And indeed, there is a law, an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023.
Supported by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, then Senator. Yep.
Call it the Rubio law, that in fact says that the decision to withdraw from NATO, as then Senator Rubio put it, is far too important to be left to a single president. It requires 2/3 of the majority in the Senate. So there are reasons to think that maybe as we are celebrating the 77th anniversary of the treaty, that we're not going to withdraw. But the larger point I think, is not a legal one. The larger point is that if you are in Europe and you've listened to the president now for the better part of 10 years, calling NATO obsolete when he first came to power, you're going to have to start to wonder, is the United States going to be there when the chip's down?
Enter the Shadow Alliance, Ambassador. I'm wondering what you make of this meeting last week. The UK held a virtual conference with 35 allied nations, not just Europe. Canada, Australia, Japan, and others were involved. Is this the new coalition of the willing?
Well, perhaps, and it's part of this middle power push that started with Mr. Carney back in Davos, when he said that the United States couldn't really be trusted, and we needed to bring together the allies of the United States to deal with the major problems, whether it's in trade or in security affairs. And it is noteworthy that a war started by the United States and Israel that predictably led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz now may have to be resolved resolved, at least the opening of the Strait of the Hormuz and keeping it open, by a coalition that does not include either Israel or the United States. And it does point to something fundamental, a new rebalancing of power in which increasingly European, Asian, and North American, Canada in particular, allies are starting to come together and say, how can we maintain a system that has served us, and by the way, the United States, extraordinarily well, even if the United States is no longer willing to be part of that system, or indeed, even if the United States is actually upsetting that system from within through the actions both on trade and security and the use of force that it has created. So perhaps this is the beginnings of a new way of thinking.
We've talked about the possible damage to NATO and the international system, but in an op-ed for Politico, you talk about the damage this conflict has already caused on the global economy, saying that the damage that's already been inflicted on the global economy is far greater than the economic consequence of the Iraq war in its entirety. But that's not all. Geopolitically, the U.S.-Israel war with Iran will also have far greater reverberations than the war in Iraq ever did. Can you explain that a little bit more? I know we've been talking about it, but why do you make that thesis, and how do you back it up?
Yeah, so, I think many people look back at the Iraq War, I do myself, as one of the great strategic blunders since Vietnam. I think this is a greater strategic blunder. This was a war that was unnecessary, in fact, illegal, unprepared, and with consequences that are far greater. On the geopolitical side, if we look at the world, at the way the world is organized, back in 2003, Russia and China were minor powers. Russia had been devastated economically, as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin had just arrived on the scene. He was focused on rebuilding the state, rebuilding the military, rebuilding Russia's standing in the world. He wasn't really capable of doing much more. And the same is true for China. 25 years ago, China had just entered the World Trade Organization, was just starting the process of building up its economy and becoming the major economic power it is today. But today, China is strong. China has a major technological, economic, and increasingly a military edge, not only in Asia, but around the world. And so when China looks at what's happening here, they see the United States withdrawing capabilities from East Asia, from Japan, from South Korea, and indeed from the Indo-Pacific, expending extraordinary amounts of ammunition and missiles and capabilities, and saying, well, maybe this is not such a bad thing for us. The United States is getting weaker as we do nothing and just get stronger. At the same time, Russia which is suffering greatly until February 28th, was starting to relook at whether it needed to rethink the war it was conducting, which wasn't going very well, in part because the economic costs were extraordinary. Russia now, of course, is selling oil at $100+ dollars per barrel a day to India and around the world. And the United States has even lifted sanctions on Russia so that Russia can now supply Cuba. So under those circumstances, who's winning and who's losing? We're paying the big price. The global economy is being torn at its fabric because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. But Russia and China are looking at the world and saying, when this is over, we're going to be in a much better position than we were before. And that just wasn't the case when the Iraq War happened.
Well, now it's the Economist cover this week. It has President Xi standing behind an out-of-focus President Trump.
Yeah.
And the title says, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake.
It's pretty remarkable. Ambassador, I wonder, as a career diplomat, what you make of the way the administration is framing so-called negotiations. Iran, of course, continues to deny that they are happening and has called this an exchange of messages. Are these back channels? Do you believe the president when he says we're in negotiations?
Well, it's a very strange time when, in fact, you have to wonder whether the president is saying the truth when he says that we are engaged in major negotiations, when he's saying that the Iranians are, quote, begging us for a deal. Yeah. And you then talk to the Iranians, and the Iranians say, well, I'm not sure what he's talking about because we're not even talking to you guys. Mm-hmm. I think what is happening is the president has found himself in a strategic box of his own creation. He thought this was going to be a quick, easy war. He thought that somehow, because we had done an extraordinary military operation in Venezuela, that military was invincible and could do anything he wanted. And he just happened to forget one small thing. In war, enemies get a vote. And this enemy has been preparing for this war for 47 years. It knew that the day would come that the United States would engage in military operations against Iran. And they knew that they couldn't win a straight fight. They had to win a fight asymmetrically. They knew that they had geography on their side, and that's what they've been doing. So the president is trying to force a deal to allow him to leave. And the Iranians, unfortunately, aren't playing ball. We're living in a world in which the Iranians seem to have the cards and the United States doesn't.